Yo, what is up, everybody? Fresco back again with the new horror story for you guys. This one is titled The Midnight Road, written by Ashley Schuletter. Remember to use the links in the description below to show love to the author. Like, comment, and subscribe. Chapter 1. August 1986. When Billy Hudson came screeching into the sheriff's department on the night of August 8th, his cherry red Firebird came within a hair's breadth of sideswiping a prized Cadillac belonging to Sheriff Andrew Lutz. When he heard the squealing of tires, Sheriff Lutz looked up from the outdated magazine he had been absentmindedly thumbing through. He saw the fender of Billy's Pontiac come swinging towards the driver's side of his caddy, and was out of his desk and halfway to the station in one swift, fluid motion. What the blazing hell was Billy thinking? Lutz thought, with a look at his scuffed metal watch. It was barely minutes into Saturday morning when Lutz's first inclination that the young man had been drinking. What kind of drunk driver willingly drives himself into police custody? Before the wheels of the Firebird had come to a full stop, the driver's side door swung open, and Billy Hudson tumbled out, falling to his knees before stumbling back to his feet.
They're dead. The McGuires, I think they're all dead.
Lutz's mouth was already open to chastise Billy for nearly smashing in the door of his Cadillac, but at Billy's words, his jaw snapped shut with an audible click. Lutz took note of the scene before him. He had been sheriff of Richmond County for more than 10 years, having won re-election twice after Sheriff Bradley retired back in '75. In a county with 40,000 inhabitants spread over 400 square miles, he spent most of his time on the highways, and so was well acquainted with Billy Hudson and his group of gearheads. Billy was a polite kid, always respectful, but that wasn't always the case with the young people of the town. Local teenage boys were entirely obsessed with their cars and could often be found on one lonely country road or another late at night, drinking and drag racing, and having generally a wild time. They weren't bad kids necessarily. There just wasn't much else to do in an area that was almost entirely given over to corn and soybean fields. At least once a month, Lutz or one of his deputies would have to go out and disperse the group once they got too rowdy and began blasting the speakers on their stereos loud enough to wake the long-suffering farmers in the area. With a sinking heart, Lutz thought he knew what might have happened. Which one of you hit them? Where's the accident?
No one hit them, Sheriff.
We weren't racing tonight.
Dude Lennox is in deep shit with his daddy for wrecking his brand new Ford and...
Get to the point, Billy.
Sorry, sir.
So look, no one was racing tonight, Sheriff.
I was out with Molly Green. She lives over in Oakville.
We went to the drive-in, and I took her home. On the way back, I wanted to... Well, I decided to take old Highway 99. Like how peaceful it is out there at night. Anyway, I was over by the McGuire place, you know, that big patch of woods out by the farm. I was driving out there and I thought I saw something cross the road. It was like a dark shadow, bigger than a bear. It scared the shit out of me.
I nearly lost control of the car. There aren't any bears around here, son. Sure, it wasn't a deer. Wasn't no damn deer, sir. Moved like a cat. But I was hunched over and slapping like a bear. I only saw it for a second, but definitely wasn't any deer I ever seen. It was taller than the roof of my car. I swear. What nonsense was this? Lutz ran a hand through his dark, thinning hair and looked down. It was then that he noticed the blood splattering on Billy's dusty work boots at the hem of his jeans. Backing away slowly from the young man, Lutz edged his right hand ever so closer to the revolver holstered at his hip. He began eyeing the red Pontiac for dents and scratches, amusing this story, an animal was nothing more misdirection. Finding none, he turned carefully back to the young man, maintaining a distance 10 feet. Okay, Billy, you got 12 seconds to start making sense before we start to have a problem. Why are you saying that the McGuires are dead, huh? Whose blood is on your shoes, son? I was trying to tell you, Sheriff. I was driving out on Old Highway 99, and I saw this big hulking shape across the road. I don't know what it was, sir, honest. But it spooked me bad enough that I damn near skidded out. When I finally got the car stopped on the shoulder, I looked around. Whatever it was, disappeared into that patch of forest next to the McGuire plot. Look, I figured the same as you, sir. I thought I was just seeing things late at night. But then, in my headlights, I could see some kind of, like a liquid on the road. It was like oil, except when I looked again, it wasn't oil. It was blood. Is it possible this animal, or whatever you saw, could have been wounded? Look, that's the first thing I thought too, Sheriff. And I hopped out the car and grabbed my Winchester rifle out the trunk. Figured I could at least put the poor creature out of his misery. And when I got closer to the blood on the road, Out with it, son. What did you see? Saw an arm, sir. On the side of the road, just beyond my headlight, was a lady's arm, ripped off at the elbow. It was still wearing a wedding band. At this, Billy started shaking so badly, the sheriff thought he might be on the verge of having a seizure. He looked around for a moment, baffled at the turn of events his previously peaceful evening had taken. Then, he squatted down on his haunches next to the trembling young man. Out of habit, Lutz sniffed the air around Billy Hudson's head, almost hoping for the telltale whiff of whiskey or gin. But there was nothing. Lutz turned and walked back into the sheriff's department. Clarkson, he bellowed for his senior deputy. A moment later, Henry Clarkson's head popped out of his small office. Sheriff? Thank goodness it was Clarkson on duty tonight. Clarkson was a calm and capable officer, excellent in tense situations. The only African American on the force, Henry Clarkson had a booming voice and a deep-barreled chest that could be used to great effect on unruly suspects. But he also possessed a logical mind that tricked through every possible scenario before taking any action. Thank God it wasn't Miller. Let's start again. This time in relief that it wasn't his younger, jumpier deputy sharing the station tonight. Is the cruiser gassed up? Good. Grab the rifle and the shotgun and get some flashlights as well. Going out to Highway 99. Something may have happened over at Bud McGuire's place.
An additional benefit, Clarkson followed orders without peppering him with dozens of questions. The deputy nodded shortly and turned to do as asked. In the meantime, Lutz went back outside and squatted down next to Billy Hudson, who was still kneeling on the lawn, his head in his hands. Lutz's mouth had a sour taste, and he longed for a cigarette. "Okay, Billy, you did good, son. Okay, just breathe, breathe." Andrew Lutz murmured this litany over and over, remembering as he did the way his own father used a similar technique to calm skittish horses. Sure enough, after a minute or two, Billy Hudson's breathing began to slow, and the rigid tension along his spine relaxed. Billy took 2 more slow, rattling breaths, looked up after Sheriff. "After I found the arm, I went into the house. I can't explain it, sir, but something horrible happened in there. I'd like to go home now, please. That's okay." Sheriff Lutz wanted to tell Billy Hudson that he could go home, have a hot shower, and a stiff drink. It wasn't meant to be. "Sorry, Billy. We need you to show us exactly where all this happened. There aren't any lights out there. We'll drive right past it in the dark." A flicker passed over Billy's face, like he was choking back tears. But his jaw tightened, and he just gave a short, hopeless nod. Lutz called his junior deputy at home, rousing him out of a deep sleep with orders to haul his ass over and man the station while the 2 senior men went to check on the McGuires. Then the 3 of them piled into the sheriff's cruiser and headed north to Highway 99. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of Chapter 1. Yo, what is up, everybody? So let's go back again with another chapter from the story titled The Midnight Road, written by Ashley Schuletter. Remember to use the links in the description below. Show love to the author, like, comment, and subscribe. Chapter 2. The 20 miles from the sheriff's station to the McGuire farm passed in almost complete silence as the mostly darkened buildings of the small town gave way to the entirely darkened farmland that made up 90% of the area. Endless acres of corn and soybeans framed every small town in the county, up to 40 miles between communities. Lutz had spent his entire life in Richmond County, and for him, the horizon would always be where the sky met the fields. This limitless expanse of cultivated land was interrupted, rarely, by spotted patches of trees and scrub brush. Most of these forests were barely 20 acres wide, except the Iowa River Nature Preserve, which sprawled over nearly 30 miles of land on the western side of the highway. On the eastern side of the road was Bud McGuire's farm. Those woods had always given Andrew Lutz the creeps. It was an odd, silent place of skeletal pines and briar bushes, offering none of the secret trails and trickling streams of the patches of woods he had enjoyed as a boy. It was also unused by hunters. Even in a region choked with hungry deer, they had no desire to chew on the tough pine bark offered by the trees. Whatever nature the state government was intent on preserving was an open question. The tiniest sliver of waxing moon shone in the sky, not providing enough illumination to make out anything beyond the orange beam of the cruiser's headlights. Each man was lost in his thoughts. Sheriff Lutz had conveyed the broad strokes of the matter to his deputy as they had pulled out of the station. So we have at least one casualty, likely more, reports of a large animal, possibly a mountain lion. A mountain lion, sir? Have you looked around, Sheriff? Have you seen any fucking mountains? Look, if we're going to Bud McGuire's house, sir, you know as well as I do what we're going out there to find. Yes, Lutz thought, as he pulled into the pitted asphalt of Highway 99. I know exactly what we're likely to find. His hands itched for a cigarette, but he pushed the urge aside. He allowed his thoughts to drift to Bud McGuire and tried to ignore the sinking feeling of dread in his stomach. Andrew Lutz had been in his mid-20s when he had first encountered Buddy McGuire. He had been out on patrol one afternoon, driving down the quiet streets of the town, when he had seen a young boy in an abandoned lot, squatting in the dust next to a dog. The dog was lying on its side. Concerned that a beloved pet had been struck by a car, Lutz had parked and approached the pair. The dog, a brindle mutt with wide, sad eyes, was convulsing in the dust, panting shallowly as the young boy watched. Buddy could not have been more than 8 or 9 years old at the time, but he showed not a flicker of emotion as he watched the dying animal. "Is this your dog, son?" Buddy hadn't answered. Most kids were unfailingly polite to police officers, at least back in those days, but Buddy simply ignored Lutz and continued watching the dog as its breathing became slower. "Do you know what happened to this animal?" Still, nothing. But then Lutz had noticed a sheet of butcher's paper balled up at the boy's feet. Looking closer, he could also see scraps of some kind of ground meat. A picture of what had occurred here was beginning to form in his mind. "Did you give poison bait to this dog, boy?" At his shout, the boy finally turned and met Lutz's eyes. The blank, expressionless look on the face of the child caused the officer to take a step back in surprise. There was no fear, no hint of intimidation at being addressed by a stranger, policeman at that. There was nothing reflecting back in Buddy McGuire's eyes. Shaken, Lutz had reported the incident to the then sheriff, Bradley. Bradley had hooked his thumbs into the sagging waistband of his trousers and pointed out that it had been a stray animal, not a cherished pet. It was a terrible death, to be sure. Local farmers often shot and poisoned strays that wandered to their property. The mutts would occasionally kill chickens, ducks, or even begin menacing the farmers' children as they play outside. It was a necessary evil, one the boy had probably learned from watching his own father. Lutz had gone back to the abandoned lot later that evening and buried the animal himself. Over the next 10 years, Buddy McGuire made a name for himself as one of those boys who were just really good at hurting people. When he was in 6th grade, an upperclassman had teased Buddy about his dirty, unkempt hair. In full view of students and teachers, Buddy had walked over to the older boy, grabbed his wrist, and twisted until bones crunched. Bud McGuire had been expelled in 10th grade and was just in time to be swept up by the Vietnam War 2 years later. No one quite knows what he got up to over there. When he returned to the town in '75, it was as if a blanket of rage had settled itself on Bud's shoulders. His father had died of cancer while he had been deployed, and Bud took over his family's 100 or so acres. The small farm was barely enough to keep food in their bellies and clothes on their backs, but it had been in the family for 3 generations. The soil, that black Midwestern soil, failed Bud McGuire. Corn, beans, wheat, every crop he planted seemed to wither and die at his touch. His fellow farmers prospered, the rich soil of the land sprouting healthy rows of strong green corn seemingly overnight. Despite all of this, Bud somehow managed to land himself a wife. In the fall of 1977, a mere 15 months later, Bud came back from the war. A pale slip of a girl was seen hanging laundry on the front lawn of the McGuire's farm. She had long, moosey brown hair with wide blue eyes that were forever fixed on the ground. Who she was, where she came from, was anyone's guess. This would have maddened the women of the community, all of whom were obsessed with the lineage, but no information on the girl could be found. She was just there one day, silently feeding chickens or beating rugs. She never came into town, never spoke to anyone. The second time Andrew Lutz encountered Bud McGuire in a professional capacity had been about a year after the arrival of this mysterious woman. The locals had thrown their hands up in exasperation. All of their kind gestures and housewarming casseroles had been met with a closed door. The McGuires had never been seen attending any of the many churches in the community, nor had the young woman appeared at the supermarket where the wives could pounce on her. The initial confusion had given way to righteous indignation. Who did they think they were, huh? Hold up all high and mighty on their plot of land? The McGuires think they were too good to associate with their peers? But as weeks dragged on, and still there was no sight of the young woman in town, winter set in. She was no longer seen outside by the few people who drove on the old country road. The offended feelings of the townspeople began to shift into concern. Was she okay? After all, Buddy had quite the temper even before his years in the jungles of Vietnam. Finally, in the spring of '78, the wives nagged their husbands until the husbands had called the city police. The police, in turn, called the sheriff's department to tell them that someone needed to go check on that girl, to soothe the nerves of their worried neighbors. Lutz had been the junior deputy on duty at the time, and had set off up Highway 99 to the McGuire farm. Barely 3 miles from the floodplains of Mississippi River, the ground in March was a quagmire of mud that had sucked at Lutz's boots as he stepped out of the police cruiser. The house was a traditional farmhouse, 2 stories with sweeping gables that rose to create a 3rd story in the attic. A large wraparound porch upheld by thick wooden beams led up to the entrance. Lutz had looked around warily before climbing the stairs to the porch. He had knocked twice, no answer. This had been expected, and Lutz turned away from the house and went instead around the back, where sure enough, a petite young woman was sorting fresh spring herbs into an array of bowls. She had bristled like a startled cat when she caught the sight of him, and Lutz had held his hands in front of him to show he meant no harm. "Good morning, ma'am. I'm Deputy Lutz with the Sheriff's Department. Can I ask your name?" The girl's eyes had been sky blue as they looked into his with an unreadable expression. "April." The word had been little more than an exhale of breath, and Lutz had been about to ask her to repeat herself when the girl's eyes had focused on something behind his shoulder and widened with alarm. Lutz had turned to see Bud McGuire standing a few paces behind him. His black eyes had just been as blank and soulless as when he had gazed upon that dying dog. Leaning with casual menace on his shoulder, pointed at the sky, was a double-barrel shotgun with a long, sleek muzzle. Lutz had thankfully resisted the urge to startle at the sight of the burly man. "Morning, Bud." With slow, deliberate movements, Lutz had moved his hand to the pistol hoisted at his hip and thumbed open the clasp. Bud had noticed, as he was meant to. His mouth twisted in a scowl, he had replied, "You're not welcome here." It's alright, man. I'll be leaving shortly. People just have been wondering how you two have been getting up on here by yourselves all winter. Thought I'd come over and just make sure everything was okay." "Fine. You've seen. Now go." And with that, Bud had crossed a short distance between him and his new wife. Lutz had waited for him to hit her. If he did, then the deputy could bring him in to the station. But Bud just stood a few feet from the girl with a look of pure fury on his face. April McGuire had been utterly silent during this encounter. Now, she just sprang from her table of herbs as if scalded. He knelt then, and Lutz saw something he hadn't noticed before. Under the table was a large wicker basket lined with woolen blankets. Nestled, sleeping in the blankets, was a tiny, swaddled infant. The girl snatched up the basket and fled into the house without another word. Bud had turned, the shotgun still balanced on his shoulder. "This is my property. Ain't no crime been committed. You got no right to be here." Bud's words, spoken in the same eerie, deadpan voice, were all true. April McGuire had not accused Bud of anything. It wasn't against the law to hold a firearm while standing on your own land. There was nothing more for Lutz to say, so he had retreated back to the cruiser, headed back to the station. He hadn't returned to the McGuire property since that day nearly 8 years ago, The McGuires had been seen no more than a handful of times in those 8 years, most often driving in Bud's battered Dodge Ram as the family returned or drove away along Highway 99. At some point, another child, a daughter, was added to their number. Neither child was ever seen at the public school or the local Christian school. Many times, Lutz had driven slowly down the country road, hoping to see April McGuire or her children out in the yard. But the house had been shuttered and silent, and Lutz had been forced to keep driving. Over the years, most of the people in the community had long since stopped gossiping about the McGuires. Everyone sympathized with the lonely young woman isolated with her children and Bud's anger. But these were also a conservative group who prized their right to privacy. As long as there was no apparent problem at the McGuire farm, everyone merely shook their heads and went on about their lives, even though they all knew the ultimate outcome was likely to be. As Sheriff Andrew Lutz neared the McGuire homestead, he was cursing himself for not doing more, for not inventing some ridiculous reason to go check on April and her children. He only hoped he wasn't too late. Sir? The voice of Billy Hudson suddenly snapped Andrew Lutz out of his guilt and grief. Consumed by his ghoulish thoughts, he was about to miss the blind curve in the road leading up to Bud's farm. The heavy police cruiser was instead aimed directly at a large pine tree. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of chapter 2. Yo, what is up, everybody? So let's go back again. Another chapter from the story titled The Midnight Road, written by Ashley Shoeletter. Remember to use the links in the description below. Show love to the author. Like, comment, and subscribe. Lutz twisted the steering wheel violently, and the ponderous car screeched its resistance to such treatment, fishtailing wildly across the road in long, snaking arcs before he was able to get control. Heart hammering from the near miss, the sheriff pointed the car at the shallow gravel shoulder and pulled over. His hands were clutching the steering wheel in a white-knuckle grip, and it took a moment of effort to release them. He killed the engine. For a long moment, the only sound was the quiet ticking of the engine as it cooled. Ahead of this curve, the trees would open on side at the beginning of the McGuire farm. Sorry about that, guys. Finally managed to say. Officer Clarkson was looking at him with pure astonishment, as if he had just seen a mountain lion in the farmlands of Iowa. In the rearview mirror, Billy met his gaze with a dark look as the two officers unclipped their seatbelts and stepped out of the humid summer night. Immediately, something fell off, and the flesh on Lutz's arms crawled. He motioned for Clarkson to join them and released Billy from his cage in the back seat. Crossing to the trunk, Lutz pulled out his rifle and handed it to Deputy Clarkson. He grabbed the shotgun and 2 high-beam flashlights before closing the trunk. With a nod of understanding, he passed the shotgun and one of the flashlights to Billy Hudson. All of the boys and most of the girls in this region learned to shoot before they were 10 years old. Knowledge of firearms and firearm safety was deeply ingrained in the community, where almost everyone's deep freezers were stocked full of fresh venison every autumn. Lutz felt no hesitation about handing the kid a shotgun. The kid had sense, even if he was overly fond of drag racing. His driver's side door was still open. Lutz reached in to turn off the headlights and then thought twice. The dim light was all they had beside the heavy mag light he now carried opposite his service pistol. He left the cruiser lights running, closed the door to the car with a heavy thud, and the three of them turned to survey their surroundings. That odd feeling was still creeping up on the back of Lutz's neck, but it was still Billy who was able to give voice to his unease. All the bugs are quiet. Lutz listened carefully and realized he was right. This was high summer. The air was thick and humid, and it should have been filled with the chirps of insects. The nightly concerto of katydids, cicadas, and crickets was usually enough to drive a man half mad. But here, there wasn't so much as the buzz of a mosquito. The only sound was the quiet tapping of the men's boots as they began walking north towards Bud McGuire's home. The light from the headlights didn't fail to penetrate the gloom ahead, and Lutz clicked on the high-power maglite. Next to him, Billy shouldered the shotgun, his smaller flashlight pressed with one hand under the barrel. Deputy Clarkson was at the ready with the long Winchester rifle at his shoulder. Normally used when a deputy needed to put down a wounded animal on the side of the highway, Lutz was immensely grateful just now for its solidly reliable presence. Lutz swept the flashlight in slow, careful strokes from one edge of the road to another. Where did you say you saw this arm now, son? A little further ahead, I think. Maybe another 300 feet or so. Lutz continued methodically, sweeping his flashlight from side to side. At the edge of the beam, he could make out the burned rubber made by tires suddenly skidding across the road. The tracks continued up the road, fading away into the darkness. The men were now far enough away from the relative safety of the car that its dim headlights could no longer assist in the penetrating gloom ahead. The beams from the two flashlights seemed to grow smaller and fainter as they walked in loose formation up the road. Abruptly, the burnt rubber skids made by Billy's tires came at an end about 6 feet in front of him. The three men all stopped together, staring dumbfoundedly ahead. In the beam of Billy's flashlight, on the edge of the road as it faded into shrub grass, was the arm of a human female. It had been torn crudely at the elbow, and bloody strings of meat hung from one end. The other end was wearing a thin gold wedding band around the ring finger. The nails were chipped and embedded with dirt. All the blood in his body seemed to rush to his head, and Lutz could feel his heartbeat pounding sinkingly in his temples. Deputy Clarkson gave a violent heave and turned to vomit quietly into the ditch on the other side of the highway. Lutz squatted down on his haunches near the severed arm and reached for a ballpoint pen he kept in his shirt pocket. Turning his head to take one more breath of unfouled air, he used the pen to lift one of the strips of flesh away from the wound. It had been almost shredded, and for one horrifying instant, the image of Lutz's late wife, venison jerky, came into his mind. Sour bile arose in his throat, and he fought against the urge to puke. What animal could do this to a person? What animal would bother? To his knowledge, there had never been reports of bear in this area, and any wolves had been killed off generations ago. Coyotes would take a chicken or a duck once in a while, but Lutz couldn't recall a single instance of them going after a small child, let alone a grown woman. Besides, these weren't the teeth or claw marks of a coyote. Whatever had done this had much longer teeth. A sudden snap from the forest on his left, and Lutz's blood turned to ice in his veins. Clarkson heard it too. His rifle was back at his shoulder in an instant, and he took a hesitant step towards the looming blackness. Next to him, Billy Hudson was utterly rigid, his fingers deathly white around the grip of the shotgun. Another snap in the darkness. Had that one been closer? He quickly swung the beam of the flashlight away from the grisly scene on the road, in the direction of the woods. It illuminated skeletal pines and waist-high thorn bushes. The light shone eerily on the narrow trunks of the pines. With their ladders of broken branches, the trees became rows of menacing spears, waiting to impale unwary travelers. The unnatural silence of the woods was oppressive. Lutz peered into the darkness, willing the shadows to separate into shapes. He focused on the edges of the light, where it faded into a thick and impenetrable blackness. He thought he could see shapes in the dark, looming patches of shadow that were somehow blacker than the night. A hulking figure dancing just out of his field of vision. But nothing came charging at them from out the woods. After a long moment, Lutz relaxed his posture. Telling himself unconvincingly that he had been a deer, Lutz turned back to Billy. They now had evidence of a death, but not necessarily evidence of a crime. There was still work to be done, where they could all go home. Did you say there were more bodies? Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Just come see for yourselves. Clarkson looked bewildered by the answer, but rolled his eyes and shrugged. All right, let's get this done, Sheriff. This place is giving me the fucking creeps. Hearing his deputy admit apprehension somehow served to boost Lutz's own confidence. The forest was now at his back, and he felt watchful eyes on them, but he shook off his nerves. Nodding affirmation at Billy, he confirmed, "Let's get this the fuck over with and go home." Leaving the lone, pitiful arm on the side of the highway, the men now began skirting the edge of the cornfield that bordered Bud McGuire's home. The corn, which should have towered over them at full height of 6 feet, was sickly looking and scrawny. This actually offered Lutz some comfort. The weakened stalks of the malnourished crops made it easier for the beam of the maglite to pierce the fields. Looming ahead, set back nearly a quarter mile from the edge of the highway, was the McGuire house. At first, it looked much the same when Lutz had paid his visit 8 years previously, but the disrepair of the home became increasingly apparent as they turned onto the loose gravel driveway. At the start of the path was the rust-eaten mailbox leaning precariously on its weathered wooden post. The McGuires had obviously failed to keep up with their correspondence. He wondered idly how Bud took care of things like electricity and plumbing if bills never came to their house. The main house must have been truly lovely in some bygone age. Its frame was a clean and crisp colonial, with gabled windows and a large wraparound porch. But the clean lines were obscured by a sagging roof and missing shutters. The porch was also drooping, with a dilapidated wicker couch sitting neglected in one corner. What must once have been cheerful white paint and blue trimming was now gray and peeling great strips from the wood. The whole house had an air of exhaustion, like a once proud old horse that no longer had the energy to hold its head up in the traces. The front door was hanging open by one twisted hinge. As the men approached, Lutz held up one hand curled into a fist as a signal to hold position. His earlier jitters had cleared away, replaced by the curiously detached feeling he always felt when he was approaching a crime scene that was sure to be unpleasant. Normally, it was a high school kid who partied too hard or wrapped his car around a tree, or a trucker who came home drunk and decided to put his wife in the morgue. After 30 years in the sheriff's department, Lutz was no longer a stranger to the violence inherent in men. But it wasn't a man that tore that child's arm off, though. As if to confirm this chilling thought, Lutz shone his flashlight on the broken door of the house. Scratched deep into the wood, deep enough that the door was nearly splintered into pieces, were 4 parallel gouges running from the top of the doorframe to the bottom corner in one long, unbroken arc. The aluminum doorknob was twisted out of shape and hung uselessly to one side. Beyond the door lay only more darkness. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of chapter 3. Yo, what is up, everybody? Ceresco back again with another chapter from the story titled The Midnight Road, written by Ashley Shoeletter. Remember to use the links in the description below to show love to the author, like, comment, and subscribe. Deputy Clarkson had been a wonderfully good sport up until this point, but when presented with the prospect of crossing the threshold of this house, he balked. He released his death grip on his rifle, lowering it to his side and exclaiming, "No offense, Sheriff. Fuck this. I'm not going in there. Go back to the car and call." "Call who, Henry? State troopers can't do anything except write tickets to out-of-towners. The town police calls us when there's a violent death." Who exactly should we call? Animal control? Clarkson glowered back at him. Well then, let's go back to the car and come back in the goddamn daylight. Personally, Lutz felt that Clarkson was speaking the most sense that anyone had all night. But as much as he privately agreed with his deputy's plan to retreat far away from the McGuire house, they were there, and there was a job to do. Come on now, Henry. Billy's been inside. Can't let the kid show us up now, can we? He sighed, ran one hand along his forehead, and through his salt and pepper hair, and tried again. Yeah, Clarkson, this does suck. Doesn't change facts. We have to find out what, if anything occurred here tonight. Let's just sack up and get it done, yeah? It wasn't much of a pep talk, but it seemed to do the trick. Billy gave a heavy shrug, scuffing his boots against the brown grass bordering the McGuire's front porch. Clarkson gave his eyes a good moment to pray, and then he re-shouldered his forearm and nodded at Lutz. I'm gonna take a long weekend. Gonna take my wife up to Iowa City, gonna go to Red Lobster. It's Crab Fest. He continued muttering to himself about his upcoming weekend, but brushed past Lutz and climbed the creaking steps onto the porch. You can have the whole week off, Lutz mentally promised his deputy. Then he pulled his revolver out of its holster, thumbed the safety off, and followed the two men past the entrance and into Bud McGuire's home. A profound silence settled around the men as they crossed the threshold of the McGuire house. The footsteps made by the officer's heavy boots were muffled by the layer of dust that lay upon the floor. In the beam of the flashlight, the wallpaper in the foyer may have been a sunny striped yellow at some point, that had been warped with water damage and was now the color of old urine. Ahead of the men was a long corridor with a doorway on either side. On one side, Lutz could see the ubiquitous farmhouse, a mudroom complete with rows of rubber Wellington boots and heavy winter parkas. The wellies were dull and cracked with disuse, and the coats were moth-eaten and smelled of damp. A closed door led deeper into the house, probably into the kitchen. On the left side of the corridor was a room Lutz's wife would have referred to as a parlor when she was alive, with delicate furniture and assorted porcelain figurines. Here was the first evidence of human activity. The dainty tables were smashed to bits, and the rose-patterned love seat was at a defined angle to a moth-eaten rug, as if someone had forcibly shifted the couch by standing with sudden force. A broken water jug lay in pieces on the floor. Oddly enough, even these violent scenes was gentled by a thick layer of dust. So far, the only sign that a living person had been in this house were the tracks he could see in the corridor that had clearly been made by Billy's heavy work boots. Where were the McGuires? Lutz moved on a constant pivot, shining his high-powered flashlight into every corner and crevice. His senses felt electrified as he strained each one of his senses to determine whether or not a threat still lurked in his house. According to his eyes and ears, this was just a normal house, though. Billy! Why the fuck did you even come in here?
Like I said, sir, I thought maybe someone was in trouble. When I got here, it was just like I had to keep going. I had to see for myself.
Lutz understood. He could feel it too. The panicky urge to head back for the car was drowned out by grim determination. He needed to find out what the hell had happened here. Past the open doorways to the mudroom and the parlor was a flight of stairs that went from the first floor all the way to the attic in a long switchback. The stairs, like everything else in the McGuire house, seemed to be standing upright by sheer force of will alone. Running along the right edge of the staircase in a long unbroken line from top to bottom was a wide swath of dried blood. The first thought that ran through Sheriff Lutz's mind in that moment was that he wished he lived in a larger city with more resources. They were farther north, near Des Moines or Cedar Rapids. The three men standing in the McGuire house could be surrounded by backup within an hour. A small fleet of detectives, forensic experts, photographers, evidence baggers, and rubberneckers could gather at the homestead. The living darkness of the August summer night would have been beaten back by high-powered flashbulbs and battery-powered spotlights. Under their harsh glare and soothed by the shop talk of gathered officials, whatever horrors had visited the McGuire family would be revealed, just another crime scene. Still tragic, but acceptable to the mind. A sane sequence of events. Unfortunately, his little pocket of eastern Iowa was small and underpopulated. The mechanics needed to properly investigate a potential crime were simply not in place. As much as Lutz dreaded the idea, it would have to be him that ventured up those stairs, and it would have to be now. He would have to venture up there, and so would Clarkson, as department regulations forbade an officer from entering a potential crime scene alone. Plus, he wanted Clarkson's steady presence beside him with the Winchester. That didn't mean they all had to go. Billy, if you don't want to go up there a second time, now's your chance. Go wait for us on the porch. Stand guard. With all due respect, sir, there's no way I'm standing down there by myself. All right, your choice, kid. Lutz gave him a nod and turned back to the problem of the staircase. They will have to make sure they didn't contaminate the crime scene with their boots. The blood was thick all the downstairs, where it abruptly stopped on the second to last riser. Here, a slightly thicker pool of blood still shone with faint wetness under his flashlight. Whatever had happened here had happened recently. Slow and steady does it now. Don't step on it. Squeezing his lanky frame to the far edge of the staircase, Lutz placed a heavy boot on the first riser. A puff of dust arose, and the stair gave a wheezing groan, but it did not buckle under his weight. Lutz began slowly advancing his way up the stairs, pressing firmly on each stair first to test its stability. The staircase creaked and moaned, but continued to hold firm, and he motioned for Clarkson to follow.
Lutz could hear his usually taciturn deputy muttering various prayers and swear words under his breath. The swath of blood continued up the stairs in an unbroken streak. Now it veered off to the right and disappeared into the darkness of a long corridor. The overwhelming odor of dirt and mold, with the coppery smell of fresh blood, was also thick in the air. A few framed photos hung at uneven intervals, their subjects almost completely obscured with dust. The dust on the floor was disturbed now, but there was no distinct tracks. It had been swept almost clean away in some places. Resigned now to seeing this through, Lutz felt his earlier fear retreat to the back of his mind. The adrenaline pumping through his system was working for him now, sharpening his focus and steadying his pulse. The corridor opened twice to the right, and Lutz circled warily around the open entrance to the first room. A cursory glance revealed a dingy bathroom, or perhaps it had once been a bathroom. Now it was a heap of stained and cracked porcelain, with a rusted-out pipe hanging loosely where a sink may have been. Torn linoleum covered parts of the floor, but most of it was the same weathered floorboards as the rest of the upstairs. The air was heavy with smells of stale, grime, and mildew. The path of blood, which had become thicker as they advanced along the corridor, continued down the hallway to the second room. Lutz signaled to Billy to cover the entrance of the bathroom. Then he and Clarkson advanced, firearms cocked and ready. Lutz still carried the maglite, held to the top of his service pistol. He was the first to cautiously peer around the corner of the room, at the end of the hall. When Lutz first shone his flashlight into the darkened room, he actually breathed a sigh of relief. He had expected to find the strewn and dismembered bodies of April McGuire and her children in pieces about the floor. Instead, the room appeared entirely empty on first glance. There were no severed limbs clad in footy pajamas. There was also no furniture, curtains, rugs, or anything else to indicate that the space had ever been occupied by inhabitants other than mice. The bare wooden floor was littered with their droppings, but not much else. He began sweeping his flashlight from floor to ceiling. The walls had been painted a deep scarlet that looked almost wet by the light of the... Oh. For a span of time that felt like an eternity, but was in reality probably more than 30 seconds, Lutz stood shocked, still in the entrance of that room, his head cocked to one side like a man trying to figure out a really good riddle. One eyebrow was raised, and his mouth hung open in bewilderment. The room had been drenched in great splashes of blood that reached all the way to the ceiling in some places. It was swirled in sporadic circles across the floor and spattered across all four walls. Closest thing Lutz could compare it to. Behind him, Lutz could hear Clarkson's sharp intake of breath as he also took the scene before them.
Then it was as if all the air went out of his lungs, and Sheriff Lutz suddenly deflated. He felt his knees give way and had to lean one hand against the outside wall of the hallway for support as his vision blurred and his head spun. He still had the flashlight in one hand and it was pointed into the room, shining onto the dripping walls. He felt more than saw Clarkson stumble backwards into the wall behind them. Billy stood at the doorway to the demolished bathroom, studying the mud on his boots. Lutz realized that the younger man had already seen all this. "Billy, do you see any bodies when you were here earlier?"
When I saw the blood on the stairs, I figured maybe someone was still alive up here. But when I got up here, there was nothing. Batteries in my flashlight starting to die, and then I saw that room. I got the hell out of here quick as I could. I didn't even check on any of the other rooms.
"So then, where the fuck are the bodies?" "Looks like Bud McGuire and his family in a salad spinner."
There's blood on the goddamn ceiling." "Yeah, but that's the problem. It's blood, just blood. No bones, no organs."
Lutz's mind was still spinning as it frantically tried to bring a sense of logic into what it had witnessed. Look, there should be pieces of the McGuires everywhere. So far, the only evidence of actual crime is that arm out on the road. Clarkson faced him, his normally placid face of mask, tension, and fear.
"Yeah, how did that arm even get out there? Why does it look like no one has lived here for 5 years? Where the hell are the McGuires?"
Are they in the barn? The basement?
Did Bud chop them up and carry them into the woods? Was it even Bud? What the hell are those claw marks on the door, Sheriff?
Lutz gripped his deputy tightly by his shoulders, his own fear gone in the face of his officer's recently panic. "Of course it was Bud, Henry. We'll find them, don't worry." This idea, as nightmarish as it was, offered a kind of morbid comfort. Bud McGuire might be a deranged madman who had just killed his entire family, but he was a man. This whole time, Billy Hudson had been silent, his eyes fixed on the open doorway to the dingy bathroom. Now, Billy cleared his throat, almost sheepishly said,
"Sheriff, you might want to see this."
Lutz pinched his nose between his two fingers and reluctantly asked,
"What is it?"
Billy just gestured with the head of the shotgun. In the bright glow of his mag light, Lutz could see a thin line of blood slowly making its way from behind the open bathroom door. Immediately, his heart, which had just begun to resume its regularly scheduled heartbeat, started jackhammering wildly in his chest. Somehow, in that moment, Lutz knew. Whatever they had come here to find was on the other side of that door. On their first walkthrough of the corridor, all three men had been preoccupied by the path of blood that led to the room at the end of the hall. Now, upon closer inspection, Lutz realized that there was the faintest glimmer of light coming from the darkened bathroom.
His mouth was dry as a bone, and Lutz swallowed hard, and then pistol was still at the ready. He eased around the doorway of the bathroom and put his back against the nearest wall. He checked the corner and, finding it empty, proceeded to the circle slowly around the room. Clarkson covered him from behind, while Billy stood guard once more outside the room. The light was coming from two flickering candles, the tall glass ones of the sort his grandmother used to burn on Sundays. The flames were sputtering their last breaths, and two more candles had already drowned their own wax. How long does those candles burn? Lutz made a mental note to check and kept his eyes on a swivel, trying to observe as much as possible about the scene. The candles had been arranged next to a chipped green bathtub to form a small circle, in the middle of which was a blackened circle, as someone had foolishly decided to build a fire in the middle of the floor. On the edge of the bathtub was a draped and faded calico dress. Lutz approached the garment, which had been carefully arranged so as not to wrinkle against the sides of the tub. The tub itself was empty. Lutz suddenly froze as he heard Clarkson swore a low oath behind him. Filled with sudden dread, he pivoted instinctively to his heel and prepared to fire. For the first time that night, Andrew Lutz screamed at the top of his lungs. Slumped in one corner of the thrashed bathroom, in a slowly spreading pool of blood, was what remained of Bud McGuire. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of chapter 4. Yo, what is up, everybody? So let's go back again with the final chapter of our story titled The Midnight Road, written by Ashley Schuletter. Remember to use the links in the description below. Show love to the author, like, comment, and subscribe. Chapter 5. Lutz couldn't tear his eyes away from the gruesome sight. Bud McGuire's face was frozen in a silent shriek, wide eyes fixed, unblinking at the ceiling. His chest had been torn open crudely. The glinting white of ribs poked through the carnage. Bud's legs were bent at an impossible angle to his torso. It had been torn almost in two at the groin. The first scream that passed Sheriff Lutz's lips was quickly followed by a second. He fell backwards to the ground and landed hard on his rear, using the heels of his feet to push himself away from the mutilated corpse. His back pressed against the rusted green bathtub, and he idly noticed that the calico dress laying across the edge had a faint pattern of purple violets. Then Clarkson's strong brown hands were wrapped around his own, and his deputy hauled Lutz to his feet. They exited the broken bathroom and its grisly contents and went into the corridor, where Billy Hudson was already halfway down the stairs leading to the first floor. The ancient staircase creaked threatening beneath their boots as the two officers followed the younger man downstairs, desperate to get their fare away from Bud McGuire's mutilated corpse as possible. Lutz burst out still open front door and stumbled down the porch steps. The humid summer air was like a soothing balm against his skin.
His lungs heaved with the effort to draw in fresh breath, and he sank to his knees, digging his fists to the hard gravel of the walkway. He could hear the footsteps of Deputy Clarkson and Billy sounding down the stairs and onto the front lawn. They remained forcefully silent as Lutz fought against the waves of heat and chills that kept alternating their way through his veins. Distantly, as if observing someone else from far above, Lutz understood that he was having a panic attack. With shaking arms, he shifted his weight until he was sitting on the lawn bordering the front porch. Dry grass crackled as he brought his knees up to his forehead and sat there, breathing in the night air. Somewhere nearby, a cricket chirped, breaking the stillness. Somehow, this was an encouraging thought. Lutz raised his head and looked for a moment at the night sky. The sun was still hours away from rising, and the sky was pitch black, except for the thousands of glittering stars. Lutz took a deep breath and held it for a long moment before slowly exhaling. He repeated this steady breathing twice more, then wearily got to his feet, wincing as both his knees cracked in protest. He brushed dry grass off the pants of his uniform and looked at his companions, both of whom had remained silently nearby this entire time. Nodding once in silent gratitude, Lutz resumed his authority as sheriff. None of them would speak a word of his temporary breakdown. They could all feel a sudden shift in the atmosphere, as if a sudden bond of kinship had just been forged. Lutz knew that the three of them would forever be bonded by the events of this night. Officer Clarkson looked at his senior officer. Do you want me to check the rest of the property? Look for the rest of the family? No, we found what we were looking for. This is officially a crime scene. It's also a 40-acre farm with 2 barns and at least 10 outbuildings. We need more men. Want me to call in Miller and Sanchez? Yeah, we'll call them in when we get back to the station. No radio signal out here worth a damn anyway. Besides, I think we also need to get on the phone, the mayor's office. We're gonna need the forensic people in Iowa City or Davenport or wherever the hell. At this, Sheriff Lutz turned and began walking back the way they had come. He glanced back one more at the darkened windows of the McGuire farmhouse, which now seemed like looming eyes in the receding light of their flashlights. His boots crunched under the rough gravel of the long driveway as the 3 men headed back towards the car. The yellow, sickly-looking corn blocked their view on the other side, looming far taller than a man even in his unhealthy state. Lutz was struck again by the eerie silence of the place. The humid summer air was heavy and still, and not a breath of wind rustled through the stalks. The near-complete absence of sound made him antsy and uncomfortable. The sooner they were back to the car, the better. Billy must have felt the same way. He trotted up alongside Lutz, his rifle loosely grasped in one hand
now that they were out of the farmhouse. In a low voice, he said, "What will happen now, Sheriff?" "First, we're gonna go back to the station. I have a bottle of Lagavulin 16 in a locked box in my office. Sheriff Bradley gave me that bottle the day I took office. Now, he told me this whiskey was peaty enough and smoky enough to burn away the worst night of your life. Told me there would someday come a night where I would need it. It sat in its wooden box every night until I really started to think that day would never come. But come it did. And tonight, I'm going to open that bottle and drink deep. And you'll drink with me, if you like." Hardened by this prospect, the men picked up the pace, and within a few minutes, they emerged from the McGuire's driveway back onto the smooth paved surface of Highway 99. Like an angel in the darkness, Lutz could see the police cruiser sitting on the edge of the road, about 300 yards down. He breathed a sigh of relief, realizing that some secret part of him had expected the black and white Chevy be gone, leaving him stranded at the McGuire's farm. Lutz's palms were sweating, and he wiped them furtively on the thighs of his trousers. He checked his watch, then checked it again in disbelief. They had barely been gone 40 minutes. When they reached the car, Lutz fumbled in his pocket for his keys, and unlocked the door and slid into the driver's seat. His hand trembled on the steering wheel, and he wondered briefly if he was fit to drive. Can't exactly ask Clarkson or Billy to chauffeur me home. Lutz unlocked the passenger and back doors, and his companions slid silently into their seats. Clarkson was still holding the buck rifle, and the shotgun was in Billy's lap, the mounted flashlight still beaming a bright circle on the car's upholstery. As one, the men fastened their seatbelts. The familiar, everyday click of the metal sliding into place struck him as utterly absurd after the night's events. Lutz slid the key into the Chevy, and he had a horrible, crawling feeling in the bottom of his stomach that when he turned the key, the engine would simply refuse to start. This was ridiculous, since the cruiser was barely 3 years old and had never done anything but purr like a kid. But tonight, right now, the car wouldn't start. Because it couldn't be this easy to just drive away, now could it? The key turned, and the motor roared to life, just as it always did. The front headlights came on, casting 2 wide beams of light to the darkness around them. Reflecting back, impossibly high against the skeletal pines of the forest, were a pair of glowing red eyes. Clarkson screamed first, throwing his hands over his face, crying out in terror. Lutz couldn't scream. His voice seemed to have completely locked itself away. His mouth gaped open in horror, but the only sound that came out was a strangled choke. Billy was scrambling to get out of the police cruiser, but since he was in the back, the doors only opened from the outside. He tried rolling down the window, and when that failed, he began to panic and bash at the glass with his fist, again and again. But this was equally ineffective.
Billy raised the butt of the shotgun and drew back, preparing to ram it through the window of the car. "No!" Lutz roared, never taking his eyes from the glowing red orbs, watching them from the forest. He jammed the clutch in, praying to anyone who might be listening to that car did not stall. He shifted into first, gave the engine some gas, and the car began moving slowly. This entire time, he continued staring at the red eyes hovering 20 feet above them. They looked back unwaveringly, glittering with a malevolent intelligence. As the cruiser rolled past, his eyes followed their progress, but did not advance. Lutz fixed his gaze on the rearview mirror, waiting for some ravenous beast to come charging behind them. But there was nothing. The darkness of the night took over, and the eyes receded into the trees. Intent now on putting as much distance between himself and the McGuire farm as possible, Lutz laid one heavy boot on the gas. Only after 10 miles, when he could see the lights of Harry Gibson's fuel station, did he ease his foot off the accelerator and relax the hunched position of his shoulders. 10 minutes later, they pulled up to the darkened windows of the sheriff's station. Lutz killed the engine of the cruiser, and the three men sat in silence. After a long moment, Henry Clarkson opened his mouth. "What the hell was that thing?" he began, but Lutz put up one hand and stopped him. Lutz shook his head, opened the door of the cruiser with a loud creak, and stepped outside. Every muscle in his body was accusing him of gross misconduct, and Lutz knew he would feel the punishment the next day. He unlocked the door to the sheriff's office and went in. The comfortable surroundings of the dingy sheriff's station almost brought him to tears. Weakly buzzing security fluorescent cast a dim yellowish glow on the familiar disarray of desks and chairs. Without bothering to turn on the main lights, he crossed the bullpen to the corner office at the back of the station and went inside his office. On the bookcase against the far wall was a narrow wooden box, which Lutz now opened for the first time in 10 years. Nestled against dark slick was the bottle of Lagavulin 16, given to him by retiring Sheriff Bradley on his last day in office. There will come a day when you need it. Lutz motioned to Clarkson and Billy, who had followed him into the station, and now stood silently behind them, framing the door to his office. Clarkson had fetched 3 glasses from the small kitchen and set them down carefully on the stained wood of Lutz's desk. Andrew Lutz sat heavily in his black office chair. He twisted the cap off the bottle of scotch, poured 3 fingers to each glass. The amber liquid glinted dully in the dim light. The powerful, peaty smell of the alcohol bit into his nose as he raised his glass and the 2 men in front of him raised theirs. "Drink up," he advised. In one smooth motion, all 3 of the men drained their glasses. The scotch blazed a fiery trail through his stomach.
burn the nightmares away. He reached to refill his glass. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of our story.
Yo, what is up, everybody? So let's go back again with some more Christmas horror stories for you guys. These will be written by Miss Unicorn 257, so remember to use the links in the description below. Show love to them. Like, comment, subscribe. Story 1. The Painting. My family and I were visiting my grandma for the weekend, and as the sun was going down, I was getting more tired from lack of sleep because of overworking. My grandma said I could sleep in the basement guest room. However, my younger brother was already sleeping down there, so I had to be quiet as not to wake him. So I went into the room and decided not to turn on the light and to just crawl into the bed. I was about to fall asleep till I realized an odd painting I've never noticed before. It was of an ugly old man who looked like he hasn't taken a shower in a while. I tried to ignore it, as it was just a weird painting and I'm trying to sleep. I never had worse sleep in my life. I felt like something or someone was watching me. When I woke up, I looked at the painting to get a clear look at it. However, it was a window. All I saw was the clear and sunny morning. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of our story.
Yo, what is up, everybody? So let's go back again with a new horror story for you guys. This one is titled The Patient, written by Old School Horror. Remember to use the links in the description, show love to the author, like, comment, and subscribe. Chapter 1, Arrival. The aisles of the hospital seem haunted by those who had found their unfortunate end in the building. Despite the good lighting, some darkness was still lingering in the stone, concrete, and steel of the structure. It doesn't matter how much light there is in any place, darkness still finds its way and hides behind it. Relentless, patient, and unforgiving, it is waiting. But for what? It was close to midnight. A relative silence reigned throughout the ward. Only a few coughs and whispers broke it sometimes, and they echoed through the corridors. Clock on the wall behind the reception desk seemed to be dragging. Midnight was an hour even the clocks didn't want to reach. As if clocks had consciousness. Or had they? Who knows how many secrets did the universe have? Time, space, consciousness, and the darkness behind the light. Nurse Carrie Holloway was staring with blank eyes at a crossword puzzle on the desk before her. She was tired. Being on duty during night shift was not exactly her cup of tea. The pay was a little higher, and she was safe from the craziness of the day shift, but she still hated it. Her long brown hair partially covered her face, as her head was resting in her palm. A steaming cup of coffee filled the place with an unmistakable smell. Nurse Holloway hated to drink coffee during the night. Made her stomach turn, but it was the only thing which was keeping her somewhat awake. Footsteps were approaching from the corridor to her right. She recognized them. The steps
of Dr. David Newman, who was on duty this night. Carrie really didn't like him. A man in his late 30s, married with 2 kids. David always tried to hit on her. He was never overly aggressive, but the good doctor was relentless. Carrie looked up, and the man was a few steps away. He smiled at her, as he always did, but she was not impressed. Dr. Newman was not an ugly man. Something in his eyes compelled Carrie to be cautious. The doctor saw the streaks of sleeplessness under Nurse Holloway's eyes, but he still smiled a lustful smile at her. The smell of tobacco followed the doctor. He might have been out to smoke. "You know," he began after glancing at a cup of coffee, "I can take you to a place where they make coffee. It's 1,000 times better than that. Tomorrow night, maybe?" Thanks, but I know a few places myself." "But I bet you don't know this one." "I might actually know it, but why don't you take your wife to coffee?" "Oh, come on, Carrie. You're breaking my heart." "And you're breaking your wife's heart." Dr. Newman raised his hands as if he is giving up, then turned to walk away. The next second, they both heard sirens in the distance. In a few seconds, an old and battered ambulance appeared in the driveway. Both Nurse Holloway and Dr. Newman forgot about their coffee issues and headed to the main entrance where all the emergencies came in. The town being small, there were few emergency personnel in the emergency department. There were only the ones on duty. Of course, there was also Norman, the old security guard, but he was not a medical employee. The ambulance stopped near the entrance, and its back doors opened. An ambulance worker jumped down, grabbed the stretcher. The other worker grabbed the other end, and they put it down on the ground. On it, there was an elderly-looking man with a bony, haggard face. Half-dried vomit was shining on his face and neck, also on his dirty shirt. He was mumbling something, but nobody could understand what. What happened to him?" asked Dr. Newman. "I don't know. Park ranger found him in the woods. He was in the night patrol. Looks like this old bastard wanted to kill himself. Ranger told us he was mumbling something about taking poison. Shoved his finger inside the man's throat. Make him vomit, you know? But he needs his systems cleaned. This hospital was the closest, so we brought him here." As the ambulance workers were pushing the stretcher inside, Nurse Holloway was already preparing the apparatus to clean the man's digestive system. Doing gastric suction was not something new. He did it many times on people who overdosed on pills, booze, who knows what else. As she touched the old man, she noticed flickering around her and instinctively looked up at the ceiling. In the same instant, one of the light bulbs went dead. Strange, she thought, and turned to continue with the procedure. "Hope he makes it," said the other worker, a skinny white guy with a big nose. He kept mumbling something about the other side, monsters in the dark, all kinds of weird stuff. "Yeah, some crazy shit, man," said the other one. "Don't worry, we'll do our best to save him," replied the doctor, as the two men turned to go back to the ambulance. Nurse Holloway inserted a flexible plastic tube in the patient's mouth, down his esophagus. The man gagged, but then the gagging stopped, so the nurse continued. The doctor sprayed saline solution down the tube in order to dissolve the stomach's contents. After that, he started the suction. Nurse Holloway didn't take her hand off the tube and was ready to hold the man down in case he behaved erratically. The patient was fairly calm during the procedure, but his eyes were darting all over the place. They opened and closed rhythmically. Sometimes his eyes rolled upwards, showing only their whites. Carrie shuddered at the sight, but continued the work. After finishing, she administered the patient 1 milligram of activated charcoal in order to neutralize the poison still in the man's system. His pupils are dilated, likely slipping in and out of consciousness, he said to Dr. Newman. I can't smell any alcohol in his breath. He's also soaked in sweat, probably dehydrated too. Alright, we'll give him some fluids. Ensure nervously. How's his pulse? He checked his pulse and noticed that it was fast. His sunken cheeks resembled wet sandpaper. He looked like a tarnished mannequin in a long abandoned ship. The patient's eyes stopped moving. His breathing became shallow, more frequent. His sunken eyes kept focusing on something. The stare was distant, however. The man was watching something that was not here, but somewhere else. Nurse Holloway turned to walk away. He needed something from the table nearby. The mysterious man grabbed her forearm, and she gasped in surprise. Dr. Newman saw her eyes open wide as she turned back to face the patient. Please, don't let me die here. Please, he pleaded with desperation. Sir, please calm down. Everything will be all right. If I die here, he began again. If I die here, it will cross over. So much pain in this place. Carrie looked at David. The doctor looked just as surprised. Nothing of what the man said made any sense, but still, it made both of them nervous. Don't worry, sir. Everything will be okay. We will take care of you. No, you don't understand. Please, sir. Please, calm down, said Dr. Newman, and moved to hold him down. Let me out. Come, let me out before it's too late. They were both impressed by the strength of the seemingly frail man. Sedate him, Carrie. Do it now. Carrie rushed for the sedative and a syringe. The patient became more and more violent. David had a hard time holding him down. After a few seconds, the nurse injected him with a sedative, which acted quickly. The man fell asleep while mumbling incoherent words. Put him down somewhere close. Also, tell Norman to keep an eye on the monitors. If anything happens, we have to know. Hopefully, by morning, it will be more reasonable. Nurse Holloway searched for a room which was empty and could accommodate one person only. There was plenty of free beds in the common rooms, but she didn't want to take any chances with the deranged man. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the end of. Yo, what is up, everybody? So let's go back again. another chapter from the story titled The Patient, written by Old School Horror. Remember to use the links in the description below. Show love to the author, like, comment, and subscribe. Chapter 2, Anomalies. Norman Turner, one of the oldest employees of the hospital, was sitting in front of the monitors in the security guard's cubicle near the entrance. He mostly worked the night shifts. For a long time now, he was on duty almost every night. The hospital staff liked him. He was a kind man. However, spoke little. Working the night shifts helped him somewhat get rid of his nasty habit, looking at the bottom of the bottle way too much. In the past, Norman drank a lot, but he did that mainly after nightfall. Day drinking was not appealing to him for some reason. By working during the night, he could avoid the bottle. It worked out well so far. Sleepiness took over him, as usual, and his head drooped. But, unfortunately, as always, couldn't fall asleep far too long. His head jerked upward, as if waking from a nightmare. Norman looked at the monitors, and his eyes opened wide. The monitors were switching on and off randomly. A few seconds on, split second off, as if some kind of interference messing with them. As the fog cleared from his mind, Norman saw that there was only one monitor which was not presenting this anomaly. The camera was in the room where the new patient had been placed. It seemed to work well. He focused on that one, but everything looked alright. The patient was sleeping without a doubt. He kept checking the monitors to see if he could spot a clue about what was going on. Norman reached out with one thin, wrinkled hand to the control panel. Tried to figure out if there is some problem with the signals coming from the cameras, but without success. In the blink of an eye, the monitors went blank. Norman's mouth dropped.
Come on. What the hell's wrong with you?
He kept fumbling with the various buttons and switches, but nothing happened. Then, just as they went blank, the monitors came back again.
God damn it.
His eyes remained glued to the monitor, showing the new patient's room. The hairs on his back stood up, and he felt shivers crisscrossing his fragile spine. He suddenly felt the urge to have a drink. The patient was not sleeping anymore. He looked like he was levitating in the air above his bed. His hands were flailing in the air, his legs too, but not to that extent. The patient's mouth was moving, but Norman could not hear nothing, because the surveillance equipment was registering only video and no sound. A strange wave of interference pattern was visible on the monitors. It looked random, just like the previous shutting off of the monitors, but then he recognized the pattern. The monitors were not connected in order to the cameras in the hospital. It was a lousy job by the company who installed everything. Norman saw that the interference, which was appearing on the monitors every split second, had a behavior as if it had been emitting from the patient's room, and then propagated outward. The electrical equipment registered it somehow,
beginning with the closest one, in the patient's room, and then finishing with the ones outside, and the one in the morgue. He didn't quite understand how he figured this out while watching the old man levitating in the air. It was more likely an intuitive thing than any logical deduction. After waking up from his dumbfounded state, Norman Turner dashed out from his cubicle and hurried to the front desk where Nurse Holloway was taking a sip from her awful-tasting coffee. Norman felt the smell of the drink when he reached the desk, but quickly forgot about it. He tried to tell the nurse what he saw, but what came out his mouth was more like blabbing. Carrie understood only that there was something wrong with the new patient. He didn't wonder, he somehow expected it. With a quick jerk, he stood up and saw Dr. Newman come back from another patient to the front desk. "What's wrong?" he asked, and he saw security guard's pale face and the urgency in Carrie's movements. "Something's wrong with the new patient." "All right, let's check on him." "What did you see, Norman?"
I don't know. I can't explain it.
But when he finished the sentence, the doctor was already opening the door to the patient's room. Carrie was right behind them, heart beating fast, breathing heavy. Her guts were turning unusually. He felt as if fear itself had gripped him with a vice and began twisting them around. Soon, Norman followed. The doctor switched on the light and saw that the room was a mess. Everything, which was not too heavy, was laying scattered around the place. The patient was lying on the bed, the sheet thrown aside violently. They went closer, but their movement was slow, cautious. At a closer inspection, they saw that the man was most likely dead. His mouth remained open as if he had been trying to speak or scream. He lay there, his legs spread, the hands thrown outward, empty gaze staring at the ceiling. How the hell could he have moved? "How much sedative did you give him?" he asked, looking at Carrie, who looked back at him. "Enough. I gave him more than usual, after I saw that he was getting violent." He couldn't finish, however, because Norman's raspy scream interrupted them. When the doctor and Carrie looked back at the patient, they saw him standing upright in his bed. With eyes as white as chalk, he was staring at them. The lights flickered a few times. Carrie fainted. Norman fell on his ass with his back to the wall near the door. Dr. Newman's legs felt like jelly. The folder he was holding in one hand fell to the floor. The body of the patient went limp again and fell back onto the bed. With quick breaths and a racing mind, Dr. Newman tried to gather himself. He swallowed, but there was nothing to swallow. When he saw that the body is not moving anymore, he went closer. The man indeed looked dead. He was pale and motionless. The doctor shook his head and slowly inched his way closer to the body. He cautiously reached out to touch the patient's neck in order to be sure that he's dead. Norman was watching from where he fell. Couldn't move. He knew that he had to help Carrie, but couldn't gather the courage to get up. Norman was staring as Dr. Newman reached out to the dead man, who just stood up about a minute ago. Dr. Newman's fingers touched the patient's neck. With trembling fingers and a dry mouth, he felt for the jugular. There was no pulse, however. The body also felt cold. He sighed in relief, but the anxiety and fear he was feeling did not fade completely. What the hell was that? I don't know. It must have been some post-mortem muscle spasm or something like that. Shit, I thought I shit myself. I've seen nothing like that. Me neither, Carrie. Carrie, can you hear me? He said, already kneeling beside the nurse, and put his hands on her face. She opened her eyes and shook her head when she realized that the doctor had touched her. Carrie immediately looked towards the bed, and when she saw that the patient was not moving, she let out a long sigh of relief. Is he dead? Yes, definitely, said Dr. Newman, and offered her his hand. Must have been only some post-mortem muscle contractions. Nurse Holloway ignored the gesture and got to her feet on her own. Norman stood up too, then threw one more weary look at the body. Thank God, Carrie replied. All right, we need to take this one to the morgue. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the end of chapter 2. So, body starts to go back again. Chapter. Hello. Like. Chapter. Both Carrie and Norm, the doctor knew. After all the weird shit, okay, asshole. I'll do it, don't worry. It's all the looks, Carrie's. I'll come with you, doc. Staying here. Right then, please find it. Drag the stretcher. David, dead man, placed him. Dirty shirt, and was wearing side on it. Partially unbuttoned, strange mark. That. But wait. Touched. Had a complicated shit. What's... Like a... Or no birthmark. Looks more like some... Sure, we'll know more after that. What happened to this? Anything. That, I agree. I don't want him near. Alright. So. Dr. Newt. Stretcher. Headed to the front desk. To the patients. One of them out the room. Headed slowly. He was an old man, successfully recovering. The old man turned around, turned again. Mr. Pearson. Stop. Yes, did you? Let's say. Oh, I don't know what you mean by ordinary. Thing, strange. Oh, or anything. Old, but not that. Alright, Mr. P. Went to step into the doctor. Oh, the old bastard is. Yes. Soon we'll all be. Finality. Then turn to walk. Harry shuddered, stepped into. Looked at Dr. Newt, who obviously heard. His face had a suspicious, thoughtful look. How the hell? As the lift descended. How the hell? Possible. A mess. Explain the mess in the. Norman, what did you see in the cabin? He felt the lifts, slowly halting at morgue, archives, other storage. Forgot about what he said. Extreme fright. Unbelievable. Like floating through. Weird interference kept messing with him. Look at the foot. I really hope. Ben pushed the stretcher. Footsteps echoed. Overpowered. Like the grinding of teeth. Norman pushed open the made an more horrendous feels. Harry shuddered again. Closed their eyes. Hoped nothing else happens to Anne. There hit them. They felt smell of embalming sanitary alcohol permeated. Also, faint smell of blood. There were two bodies in them. Ambulance brought them here. Sad result of a car accident caused by a drunk driver still been under the previous. These bodies had already been prepared for.
scheduled for the next morning meant that the old man wait. That he'll likely put him away for now. Nodded. Alright, Doc. Happy with that being said, Harry opened one. Doubt was. Oh no. That squeak. This sound seemed to be omnipresent. David and Norman placed a body on it. Sound again. 3 turned to leave. They headed. Norman touched the door, ending to lights, a faint flicker. Chills ran down. They all looked back. Everything alright. Throwing one last look at the locker, the body of the man had turned. Stepped out. Norman stopped. Searched for the keys in the pocket. Locked the door. It was not unusual. Feel better if it's after the sound, locking door for a break. Headed back. Yo, what is up, everybody? Chapter. Remember? Oh. Like. Chapter 4. Alright, look at that. Heading. Right, that's gonna be a weird one. Died. And this Nike. Necessary. None. They hurry to the small place. They could accommodate 3 people. Small table, chairs near the wall, opposite. To the left, old fridge, small cabinet. The air inside was not fresh, but surveillance monitors, panel, small window out on. Norman threw a quick glance. Saw nothing. I will put in a new cassette. Keep recording. After that, rewind the equipment was not the best regarding 1987 standard. One could watch older footage of the machine kept recording. The only drawback was one couldn't see cameras. Right, this is the camera. We fast forward to Harry and David watching with eyes as Norman was fumbling. Both hoped the old man, tired, didn't actually see. Alright, go. Digital clock in the corner of the screen. Closing in. Booming. Room seemed. Then, body of the man.
Light flickers, lights. So far, it didn't look. Seconds later, man began thrashing around. Seemed like they could not discern sound. Also, none of them remembered hearing anything. Norman came. Could it be that I heard nothing? Wait. Now, weird interference pattern. It was still visible. Patient's distress grew, flailing his hands. Scene became more and more. Then, a moment of a split second, clarity, Harry saw. Rest of it stuck. The body seemed to rise above, while still in great distress. Parts of the screen which saw a light object. Air was partially visible, slid from the bed. Then the screen was filled, almost in its entirety. Strange. It had some elements of static perceived. Superimposed on that, they could see a sharp zigzagging pattern crisscross. Few seconds, strange pattern. Did it? Sketched. Roughly, old man. After the pattern disappeared, patient was back. Now, fast beating heart. It's already out. Talk. Look like the man up in the air. How is that possible? Can't believe something. Then some. I mean, up this. I don't know. It's impossible. Try to live. Let alone dying. Hey, I saw the same. Physically impossible. Voice showed young child's. Then, how do you explain the rising of the body? Dropping back into spasm? Spasms are accompanied. Twitching? Exactly. Don't try to explain it away. I don't want to. I just want to find rational, not a supernatural. This first time, any of them had uttered. Woman staring at them. Doctor arguing. Any couple. Him stopped. Right. Trying to get back. Let's not go.
whatever happened and see the medical examiner. I have time tomorrow. Body, learn more. I will also, my super, might be some. Maybe he'll send some or anything out of interview. Really think everything. What else could happen? Then ain't gonna walk. Tomorrow, barely fit. Lights right in the rack. Chapter. Yo, buddy. Another chapter. Patient. Written. Remember to love to the author, like, comment. Chapter 5. Three of them did not move for a few seconds. Their breathing was discernible, silence. Harry's shallow and fast. An ominous feeling accompanied it, made her look around nervous. Low light came from outside. Street lamps still working. The hallway, which was leading from the entrance toward the reception desk, somewhat illuminated outside lights. Inside the cubicle, however, darkness, deep and oppressive. Oh no, not again. Ah, god damn it. Something is really fucked up here. Call for help. What are you gonna say to them, huh? Supernatural force attacked us? Come on. Probably something wrong with the power supply. Start the backup generator. Power company. I guess. I will definitely. Don't worry, I'll go. Alright, I'll try the power company. I'll check on the patient. Sure they're not in distress. That being said, we all proceeded. Fast. Norman reached for the security guard's phone, hidden by the dark. His hands knew, by instinct, where it was. During this time, Dr. Newman, flashlight, which he knew, always on the cabinet. Then, Harry is waiting. If anybody answered. Body picked up. Norman began. For a time, however, realized the person to their line. After 15 seconds or so, having too many difficulties hearing the happened. I don't know. Something was wrong with the line. At first, I heard the receptionist from the power company, but I barely heard. Then, I barely heard her. Other voices. Voices? Yeah, like any people. There's something wrong with the. Really hope it's. Yeah, me too. Me to join you? Oh, yeah, sure. Thank you. Norman took. Then. Some patients shambled out of their bed. Of course, those who could. Who were under some kind of sedation, sleeping, happened. What's going on? A woman in her late 40s
was admitted because the dog. And just something with the power line. Dr. Newman is already trying to start the generator. Shortly, be alright. Reed, everything looks fine, my. Yeah, we saw that too. I already phoned the power company, let them know about the issue. We'll send somebody to check what happened. Only after saying the words, think that what she said now, in fact, the ideal situation have happened. Harry and Norman. Good that we don't admit serious cases. That transport them to the big city. Something like this happened. Somebody was hooked to him. Yeah, I agree, Miss Hall. Like nobody gives a shit about making it automatically. I'll ride it. Your footsteps echoed. Walked. See everybody. Shadows danced on floors and ceiling as if some mysterious creature behind boundary. Some cars passed in them. Being Saturday night, the sound from their engine comforting. Didn't quite understand how. You're getting cold, or I'm just too tired. Know where that came from? Said nothing about it. Getting weirder by the minute. Afraid, mister. Shame on me, but they almost finished checking the patient. Harry heard hurried footsteps coming. Eating. Dr. Newman fled down after. Kept thinking how stupid he was. Venturing. Norman should have came down. Just wanted to prove to Kid. Now, he had to go down. Generator room at the far end of past the storage room had this. Wasn't even sure if it had any gas in it. They did. Power company did a decent job of constant flow of electricity. David walked with care, looking around for his ears were ready to fight us. There are no completely right. Snakes ready to bite and coldness. Rational mind. Felt the temperature. Here. Regardless of how hot it was outside, this floor, temperature. Oh. Picked up the pace. After noticing nothing, wanted to get out, get over it. David's heart pounded right away. All the wide. Doctor stopped dead in his. Almost dropped the flashlight. Only his eyes starting left. Was afraid to, fearing that it will be perceived by whatever. Nothing. kept repeating. The instinct to protect monsters, unknown. Dr. Newman could almost see something reaching, coming out. For quite some time, he stood there. When he saw that nothing happened, he wanted, and at the same time, didn't want to speak. Thoughts were racing, and thoughts tried to explain away. He remembered, without a doubt. Still heard the sound, made, guard. He had to reach the generator. There was no return now. He went back without restoring the power. Carrie and Norman surely consider him Lois cowards. So, straight to the generator room without looking. Generator room door was Dr. Newman slowly been shown. Rolled lockers, shelves with tools, boxes, crates, all sorts. Smell was really besides the usual smell of dust, oil, gasoline, and carbon paper, something which was resembling faint odor of sulfur, charcoal, burned flesh, drifting. Winced, then continued to look for it. It wasn't a small apparatus, so found it. The device had to furnish a whole house. David checked the fuel tank, saw that it had plenty. Then he searched, turned on. Found it, began pulling at it. Seconds, generator, life. David waited with excitement, switching on. But kept looking around. See lights. Then found the thick cable leading away from the generator, ripped out. Seemed to be a problem. Can't be fixed. If it had just been just a cut cable, that could have. This one out. Seemed to be. Right. Wires were ripped. This meant the device had to be disassembled. Ordered. His skin erupted in goosebumps. Head. This. While hearing things connected in his mind, real man. The weird events regarding the new patient, open morgue door, ripped cables, all told him now did. Dr. Newman ran out explanation. Felt that something might be there with the generator room, almost gave him. He heard nothing, constant roar, but he was feeling. There was something. He was waiting something. David was ready to scream. Stereotypical dumb girl. Any. The icy touch of death came not. Feeling soon dissipated. Slowly reached out, turned off. slowly crawled. Still here. Listen. There was no other sound. Breathing. Chaotic heart. This was when he gathered all his courage, began running. Now, ladies and gentlemen, in chapter 5. Yo, what is up, everybody? Stressco back again. Another chapter from the story titled The Patient, written by Old School Horror. Remember to use the links in the description below. Show love to the author. Like, comment, and subscribe. Chapter 6. When David reached the top of the stairs, he was already out of breath. He was not quite the man who would work out much or go jogging. Gary and Norman looked at him with growing concern. The light from the guard's flashlight made the doctor squint. He stopped and bent over, with his hands on his knees, in order to catch his breath. What happened? Something's down there. Something? What? Have you seen Dr. Newman? David went closer to them because he realized that it's not a good idea to let everybody know that there's something seriously wrong. The morgue door's open. The cables are ripped from the generator. What? Exclaimed Carrie, and her hand went instinctively to her mouth. Shaking and goosebumps covered her skin. What is down there? Asked Miss Trevino, who overheard what the doctor said. Oh, nothing serious, just some rats. Don't worry, everything will be alright. Please go back into your room, alright? Rats? Oh my god, what will come next? A goddamn infestation? Are you sure that the morgue is open? Definitely, it's wide fucking open. Can't believe it. I remember that Then take a look yourself. David pointed to the darkness, leading to the basement area. No thanks. I believe you. So, what are we gonna do? Call the cops, I guess. God, cigarette. You can certainly try, but I doubt that it'll work. I tried the power company, but the line was jumbled, and then it went somewhat dead. Somewhat dead? Yes, all I could hear were whispers and hush talk. I couldn't reconnect with the dispatcher. Let's try it anyhow. Norman agreed, and they went back into the guard's cubicle. He tried the phone, but he dialed 911 fruitlessly. There were only weird noises and whispers. Shit, what now? I guess one of us has to get help. My car is out in the parking lot. I'll go, if that's alright with you. Yes. Please, just hurry. David hesitated a little. He gave the flashlight to the nurse, then headed out. In the corridor, however, he was more cautious. Something was in the hospital. Something yet unseen, but there nevertheless. Carrie and Norman followed close by. They wanted to make sure that he reaches his car. There was a considerable distance which had to be traversed before reaching it. The parking lot had been built further from the entrance in order to avoid people's cars interfering with the ambulances. The nurse and the guard accompanied the doctor to the hall, which was right after
the main entrance. When Dr. Newman turned to go outside, he stopped, dead in his tracks. Carrie let out a short, yelping scream. A figure was standing straight in front of the entrance. Its menacing stance was visible through the glass panels of the front door. Norman pointed his light toward the figure, and that was when they saw what they were dealing with. The haggard face of the patient was staring back at them through the glass. Eyes as translucent as the paint itself. They made them shake like young kids at a horror movie. Black streaks were visible on his face, like veins filled with dark blood. They all watched in horror as the man slowly moved his hand and put it on the door, roughly where the handle was. He grinned, and the look on the dead face told them everything they didn't want to know. They will all die, and there is no escape. The steel door turned red where the man had touched it. It looked as if it was heating to huge temperatures. His eyes also turned bright red. The metal melted, and the double-sided door soon fused together. Carrie, David, and Norman just stood there with hearts jumping out of their chests. When Carrie was about to pass out again, the creature outside backed away, then disappeared into the night. None of the three inside could say a word. They froze in fear. Their minds had a hard time comprehending whatever had been happening in front of their eyes just a few seconds ago. Carrie's left hand was squeezing Norman's. He instinctively grabbed onto something when the shock of seeing the thing outside hit her. Oh my God. The hell was that? I don't know, but we're screwed. How is this possible? This can't be happening. This has got to be some goddamn nightmare. I can't believe this. The men looked at each other with disbelieving eyes. They sought answers from one another, but the answers did not come. We should try the back door, said David, and Norman nodded. It'll probably be sealed just like this one, but let's try. What does he want? I don't want to wait to find out. Come on, Carrie, let's go. And David took the flashlight from Carrie's hands and headed toward the back door. Norman followed. Wait, let me get my gun. He hurried to his cubicle and searched in one of the drawers of the small cabinet. There, he found it. His 9mm sidearm, which he was keeping tucked away because until now, never needed it. Norman put down the flashlight on the table and checked the magazine in the chamber. It was loaded, 20 portions of lead injection. For a second, he wondered if these bullets are going to do anything to whatever was lurking outside. In the end, it didn't matter. Better with a gun than without one. He tucked it away, then went back into the corridor. In a minute or so, they reached the back door, but to their increasing horror, it was sealed shut. They felt the same weird smell which David had perceived in the basement. He's inside, said David, after telling them about the smell in the basement.
He shut us all in with him inside.
The surreal nightmare became more and more real. Carrie couldn't say a word. He just hoped to escape somehow. David tried the door, but it wasn't budging. It was still warm from the touch of the creature. They turned to go back, but then movement caught their eyes. The depths of the dark corridor. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the end of our chapter. Yo, what is up, everybody? So let's go back again. Another chapter from the story titled The Patient, written by Old School Horror. Remember to use the links in the description below. Show love to the author. Like, comment, and subscribe. Chapter 7. Both Norman and David pointed their flashlight toward the moving shadow. Carrie sighed in relief when she saw that it was one of the patients. She started towards the patient, but David grabbed her hand. She hated his touch, but stopped. Wait, something's not all right. Carrie saw that the doctor might be right, because the patient moved in a funny way. It was more like shambling than moving. He was placing one foot before the other like a drunk person. The movement was, however, very decided. Miss Denvers? Why are you not in your room? No answer came, only the definite but slow walk in their direction. The light of the flashlights revealed more of her face as she was approaching. A young woman in her early 30s, but her face looked more like that of a 60-year-old. Wrinkled, sunken, her hair was messy, and her stare full of malice. The eyes seemed to be dark, but it was hard to say in the lacking lighting. Miss Danvers? Everything all right? The patient's hand reached out and touched the wall as she kept walking toward Carrie, David, and Norman. Her figure seemed emaciated, drained of life. It looked more like the victim of severe starvation, or a person found in the woods after a survival trip gone wrong.
Hear him. Fear the one from me,
He began. He then lashed out toward the three people in a surprisingly fast manner. Carrie screamed as the patient shrieked and jumped on her. David jumped back in fear. The only one who had some presence of spirit was the guard. He grabbed the woman who was now on top of Carrie, trying to choke her, and began pulling her off with all of his strength.
Come and help me, Doc, will ya?
David woke from his temporary freeze and kicked the attacker in her side. He fell on the floor beside the nurse, who was now coughing heavily and trying to get some air in her lungs. The woman prepared for another attack, but Norman was ready. He fired his pistol once. The bullet hit the patient's chest. The sound was not exactly deafening, but in the narrow corridor, the shot seemed 10 times more intense. Black blood splattered on the nearby wall and floor. It also flowed from the wound onto the white hospital gown. The woman growled in pain, but it seemed that the shot did little to slow her. Norman saw that she was preparing to launch herself at them again and fired off another shot. The bullet hit close to the other one, but it was also not too effective. The body of the woman hit the ground when the bullet connected, but then she tried to get up again.
You can kill, but he will raise 1,000. This world is doomed. You should have listened, and
He couldn't finish, however, because Dr. Newman, ended his misery using a fire extinguisher, which he took from nearby. Blood, brains, and bone fragments splattered all across the place as the upper part of her skull caved in. The patient still kept grotesquely flailing her arms for a few seconds after her head had been squished. David fell on the ground. Couldn't believe what he had just done. He looked at the others, but said nothing. They saw that his lips were trembling. They might have even turned the pale blue, but it was hard to tell. We have to get out of here. But how? The doors are sealed shut, the windows on the first floor are all barred. Hey, look at this, said Norman, and pointed to the woman. He crouched by the corpse and began gently brushing away the remaining hair from the woman's neck and lower part of her face. They saw now what the guard was talking about. The dark patch was easily recognizable on her left side. It was a handprint, but it seemed that the hand which had made it had somehow really sharp nails. What's that? Looks like a handprint, but it's strange. What else is new? The skin seems hard. How is this possible? It's just like the ceiling on the doors. That thing is in here with us, and it began transforming people into these things. We have to get out. We have to get help. That thing began targeting the patients, and we'll be next soon. Yeah, you're right, Doc. Better find a way out of here before that thing gets us. Alright, look. We can try a window in the basement. The grates are old, but we might push them out. Alright. We must be careful and quick. Let's go. They gathered themselves in a few seconds, then headed to the stairs which led to the basement area. When they turned the corner, however, they had to stop there. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the end of our chapter. Yo, what is up, everybody? So let's go back again with the final chapter of our story titled The Patient, written by Old School Horror. Remember to use the links in the description below. Show love to the author, like, comment, and subscribe. Chapter 8. A whiff of cold air and sulfurous smell hit them in the face. The lingering presence of something wicked was in the air. Oppressive and haunting, like nothing they had felt before. Dr. Newman switched off his light, then signaled Norman to do the same. The old guard complied. He understood the reason behind this move. Now, the corridor became enveloped in almost complete and endless darkness.
They needed a few seconds in order to get used to it. Moans and whispers were drifting through the air. They seemed to come from all directions. The walls, from the floor, from the ceiling. It was maddening, the real cacophony of evil. The group was advancing slowly with care. They still had to go several yards in order to reach the staircase which led into the basement. After a few steps, Norman's startled voice reverberated through the hallway as he was being grabbed by something in the darkness of a hospital room. His sidearm and flashlight both fell onto the floor as he tried to get rid of the hands which grasped his arm. Gary and David grabbed his other arm and tried to pull him back into the hallway, but whatever was pulling onto the other side was pulling harder. The nurse let him go and bent down to grab the pistol, but by the time she found it in the darkness, Norman got pulled into the room. He screamed, but he screamed in vain. Carrie and David saw only shadowy figures moving about the room, but when they saw the burning red eyes of the entity which came back from the morgue, they both screamed. The eyes fixated on them, burning red pits of fire. Carrie and David saw the strange symbol on the entity's body light up in yellowish red fire. The blackened veins on its body lit up too. It was a hellish vision, a vision which told them they needed to run. They ran toward the basement, leaving the security guard in the room, his screams fading as they ran down the stairs. The sound of an opening door followed them down the stairs. Both of them knew what that meant. Whatever the patients of this hospital had been transformed into were coming after them. David's mind was racing. He tried to figure out something in order to escape. The breaking of the grates of one of the basement windows was a long shot. There was no telling how long will it take to break through and also crawl out. When they were down, he stopped, put his hand on Carrie. "What?" asked the nurse, but now she did not shy away from the doctor's touch. Gave her some sort of security, a sign that she was not yet alone. "Look, I have an idea. Go to the storage area and try to break the grates as fast as you can. I will go to the generator room." But why?" "I want to slow them down. Just go." The few footsteps were heard, but then he picked up the pace. He quickly reached the storage room and opened the door. It was never locked. Some light came in from outside, so she could orient herself in the place. It was not much, but at least she knew where the windows were. Only the generator room had no windows in the basement. She went straight to one of the windows, took a deep breath, and lifted the fire extinguisher above her head. It was heavy, but it did not matter. Enough adrenaline was circulating in her veins to be able to handle its weight. David heard the breaking of glass, and he was already in the generator room.
Then came the pounding on the heavy iron grating which covered the window. That's gonna alert them, he thought. But there is no soundless way to get out of here. He then began searching in a chaotic manner around the place. A gas canister, he whispered. That's great. All I need is a flexible tube to... Oh, fuck this. He continued as he didn't see any tube, only a hammer. Dr. Newman grabbed the hammer and then the canister. He took off the cap from the canister and swung the hammer straight into the fuel tank of the generator. Gasoline began flowing out in a wild stream, his nostrils filled with nauseous vapors. He quickly put the canister under the flow of gasoline and waited for it to fill. The banging on the grates were still reverberating through the dark corridor. Come on, Carrie, he whispered to himself, almost grinding his teeth together. He pointed his flashlight toward the corridor, and to his terror, he saw the shambling figures at the base of the staircase. He didn't wait for the canister to fill up completely. There was no time. He had to hurry unless he wanted to let Carrie die. When he got closer to the storage room door, he saw a familiar figure among the many. They came dangerously close to the storage room. Dark eyes filled with malice, hell-bent on hunting him and Carrie down. Norman? He asked instinctively, but he knew that Norman was gone.
No,
The figure replied.
Norman is one of us now, and so will everybody soon enough.
It was definitely not Norman who was talking, but something else.
People tried for generations to prevent him from crossing over and bringing a dominion of darkness over this world. Only in a place of suffering can he come into the world, and you foolishly let the man bearing the mark of the beast enter this place.
David didn't know what to say or do. He saw the red-eyed entity appear behind the group of patients. The doctor looked at the storage door and thought for a split second. The knocking of the extinguisher on the window grates resumed desperate work. He knew that Carrie did not break through, so he had to buy her time. Entering the storage room was not a solution because then both of them would die. So he made a decision. The doctor lifted the canister up and tilted it forward while he began backing up toward the generator room. Carrie, get out. Do not wait for me. Get the hell out of here. He kept backing away as the group of mindless patients were following him. The smell of gas filled the corridor, came from behind them too. The floor of the generator room had been drenched in it. Dr. Newman entered the generator room. This was when he heard the clanking of metal as the grates on the basement window broke away from the walls. So, Carrie is safe, he thought, and kept backing away. The figures were closing in on him. There was no escape. David threw away the canister, then fetched his Zippo lighter from his pocket. He held it in his fist and then stopped. The dark figures closed in on him, and the one with the red eyes stopped in front of him.
Now you will join.
The entity put its hand on David's face. He felt burning on his skin, and also a dizzying sensation which seemed to make the world whirl around him. As his consciousness began to slip away, he had just enough presence of spirit to flick the lighter. It hit the ground in a fraction of a second, and everything around him went up in flames. He barely felt the heat enveloping him. He was not conscious anymore. Carrie was already halfway out when she heard the blaze erupt in the generator room and down the hallway. He crawled out, looked back. He felt sorry for David, but at the same time, he felt grateful too. The moans and grunts of the things which had once been this hospital's patients were still perceivable for a minute or so, but then they faded. He sighed in relief, but was still wondering what happened to the entity, the red eyes. He saw smoke and fire begin to crawl under the door, which was roughly opposite to the window. Carrie screamed when the door burst open. The entity stood in the doorway, the blazing inferno behind it. The flames engulfed its body, but it didn't seem to hurt it much. Only by the way it moved, Carrie noticed that it had some difficulty moving. It headed straight for the window. Carrie then checked her pocket, and to her temporary relief, felt Norman's pistol inside. She put it away after Norman got pulled into the room. Then she almost forgot about it. The entity walked to the window. Carrie felt the stench of burnt flesh and sulfur. She winced. It almost made her retch and throw up. It began to crawl out the small window. The wretched body was still burning, and it left a streak of burnt blood and flesh on whatever it touched. Carrie knew that running away was no option. This thing was relentless. In a moment of clarity, she took the gun in her hand and pointed it toward the head of the flaming creature.